Tackling Miami-Dade's transportation woes. The Metropolitan Planning Organization is going back in time, dusting off a 2002 plan in hopes of fixing our current traffic nightmare. Back then, lawmakers wanted a half-penny sales tax to fund construction of 6 new light rail lines. They got that sales tax, but to this day, little track has been laid. Joining us to explain why he thinks reviving that 15-year-old plan is a smart idea for Miami-Dade Transit, we welcome City of Miami Commissioner Francis Suarez, representing District 4. Commissioner Suarez is also the Vice Chair of the Miami-Dade Metropolitan Planning Organization's Transit Solutions Committee and spearheaded this initiative. Commissioner Suarez, thanks for being here today.
Sean, it's a pleasure to be with you.
So first of all, can you explain to us what is this SMART plan?
Well, the SMART plan stands for the Strategic Miami Area Rapid Transit Plan. And we developed that name in conjunction with the Transit Solutions Committee Chairman, Chairman Moss, and our Executive Director, Eileen Bouclé, and Chairman of the County Commission, Jean Monestin. When we returned from San Francisco, visiting the San Francisco transit system, which was the BART, the Bay Area Rapid Transit System. So we felt that it would be a smart thing to brand our transit system, the SMART plan, in the hopes of reigniting interest in the plan and obviously in the execution of the plan, which is the most important part. But it really started with the recognition, first and foremost, as you stated at the beginning of the program, that the half cent hasn't delivered. But that realization alone doesn't get you anywhere. It's just simply a criticism of what hasn't happened. Also, there was a lot of, and there's been a lot of fighting over what line is going to go first, and a lot of parochialism involved, which is what led me to propose reform of the MPO totally and making it more of a regional board. So you fast forward to now, what we did as an MPO in February was sort of reset. We wanted to reset the clock. And what we did was we passed a resolution in February making rapid transit the highest priority in Dade County. And that's important because we have 33 different transit organizations that fund transportation in the Dade County and South Florida region. So we needed to send a very definitive message to them that rapid transit was what we wanted. We don't want more cars, we don't want more roads. We need solutions that can move massive amounts of people in an efficient and in a cost-effective way.
Right.
And I have to give Mayor Maurice Frey a lot of credit because he's the one that forced me to say highest priority. I said high priority, he said highest priority, and he was right. It is the highest priority right now. And so as we travel to these different cities across the country, San Diego, Denver, San Francisco, one of the consistent and persistent themes of those cities and their success in getting federal funds and getting transit funding was having a coherent vision. And we were constantly, like I said, fighting one with the other. Is it going to go in this district? Were these promises made, et cetera, et cetera? And I think what we realized is that we were lacking coherence. We were sending mixed messages to our transit partners. And we decided we're going to stick together this time. We're going to finally come together. People constantly complain, elected officials, they never talk to each other, they never compromise. And we said, you know what, we're going to put our parochial, our parochialness behind us. And we're going to work together and come up with a consensus plan. And that's exactly what the SMART plan is, a consensus plan. It got unanimous consent of the MPO, which is very difficult to do because there's 23 members that represent the different county commissions and also all the different cities in Miami-Dade County.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that there's restructuring and there's cooperation because several weeks ago I interviewed Michael Lewis here where he was quite critical of the lack of coordination amongst transportation bodies across the county. So but let's get into some of the nuts and bolts here. First of all, what's the difference between light rail and heavy rail?
Well, the difference is the capacity of the train to carry people. People think it's a weight thing. It's actually not weight, light versus heavy. It's actually the volume of passengers. So typically heavy rail will go elevated or underground because you don't have to have less cars. You usually stack up 3 or 4 or 5 cars above ground or below ground because you're not blocking an intersection or anything like that. Light rail has a tendency to be at grade. And it sort of
that it runs along streets.
It runs on the ground, exactly. And so it has to have less car stacking, which means that the crush capacity of each car is less than it would be under heavy rail circumstances. But it's also usually a lot less expensive because from an infrastructure perspective, you don't either have to dig or tunnel, which is with our water table creates issues. I never say anything is not possible. But
it's very difficult.
In my generation, you try not to. But it's tougher. It's more expensive. I mean, it's really everything here in transportation is a function of expense. The modality drives the cost. So with heavy rail, you have to go either elevated with a Metro Rail or Metro Mover system or a maglev system. And underground obviously is very, very expensive in an area like ours.
Okay, so there's 6 proposed lines right now,
Yep.
and that's part of the plan, right? You guys have agreed, like you said,
Right.
And it's interesting to say you sort of want to reset from the previous plan, but is it possible? Because we've built out so much over the past 15 years, and I think in particular, one I want to think about is the Kendall corridor. Sure. From Dade Land Station running west along Kendall. Sure. Drive. How would something like that be possible? It's absolutely necessary, but where's the room for it?
Yeah, look, there's going to be right-of-way issues. I mean, there are some corridors in the 6 that have better right-of-way than others. Obviously, to cite another one in the Kendall area from Dayland to 167th along US 1, you have the South Dade Busway, so the right-of-way is already there. Right. The FEC Coastal, the right-of-way is already there because that's an already existing rail line.
And that would run from downtown?
That would run from downtown throughout the tri-coastal, throughout the
Fort Lauderdale and Palm
correct,
Beach.
the tri-county area, touching all the different downtowns. I forget how many exactly how many municipalities that it can touch going north, but several. In my job as the president of the Miami-Dade League of Cities, we've made mass transit our #1 priority as well. So what we're seeing is a community that's unifying behind solutions rather than continuing to bicker. And I think when you look at the Kendall corridor that you talked about, when you look at east-west, there could be some of these corridors that have right-of-way issues, and that could drive some of the solutions. But I think the biggest issue here is that now we're speaking coherently and in a unified fashion. And to Mr. Lewis's point, he's absolutely right. These transit agencies are not coordinating and talking to each other, but part of the problem was we were never providing them a vision. And now we finally said, this is our vision, and now we need you to figure out how you can be a part of that vision rather than giving us the same cookie cutter solutions, which are more roads, highway expansions, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you mentioned the east-west corridor along the Dolphin Expressway. Right. Again, how would that go? There's an existing rail line just south of the airport?
There is one just south of the airport that runs parallel to the 836, and that's the CSX corridor. And we were trying to acquire that. I went up to Tallahassee with Chairman Bovo, the chairman of the Transportation Committee, to try to convince the legislature to give us the funds, similar to what they did in Orlando with Sunrail, to give us the funds to acquire that. The problem is that CSX is a private company, and once they found out that we were trying to buy them, they increased the price threefold. So there are challenges there, but MDX intelligently in their expansion has left an additional lane. There's a lane there that's not touched. I don't know if many people realize that. And it just so happens that it can be perfectly suited to run either express buses in the short term or potentially some sort of light rail solution in the long run. So I think from a right-of-way perspective, that's the importance of having transit partners that participate. When you have a coherent vision, then it's easy for your transit partners to raise their hand and say, hey, I can do this. So it's not that MDX or the Florida Department of Transportation or the FHA or the FTA or U.S. Department of Transit or either any one of those is going to be the one that actually solves and does all 6 lines. But you may have one that says, hey, look, I have an expertise here and I can do one. And obviously, from a funding perspective, which I know we're going to talk about.
So that's what I was going to get to next. Is this all sounds good, and we put up the graphic from the Miami Herald, and people can go on to the issues website and see what we're talking about here. So let's talk about how could we possibly pay for 1, let alone 6 new rail lines.
Okay, I'm going to say something that's going to sound earth-shattering. It's easy, and I'll tell you why it's easy. There are many companies around the world that are looking at Miami right now and are saying this is the most exciting place in the world. And from an investment perspective, there are many rail line companies or companies that have mass transit solutions throughout the world that would love nothing more to come into our community, finance it themselves, and build right away. That's the private sector solution. That's all a public-private partnership. It's probably the most expensive of all the solutions, but it's one that can be done immediately, and it can be done for all 6 lines right away. So one of the things that I'm suggesting to the mayor is that he put out a request for ideas right after we have
the county mayor or the city?
The county mayor. Because this is more of a county issue and the MPO is more of a county issue, that he put out a request for ideas after hopefully the final adoption of the SMART plan, so that we start getting invitations from people in the private sector. So that's one option. The second option,
attractive investment opportunity.
Correct. The second option is probably where we're probably going to end up, which is some mixture of funding. When we did the Tri-Rail deal, which is connecting now to downtown, we had money from SFRTA, we had money from the Miami CRA, we had money from the city of Miami. In other words, we had a blended funding source that allowed us to execute on that project. That's probably what will happen in this situation. Certainly we can go as dramatic as having 100% financing from the private sector, but I suspect what will happen is to keep the cost down and the ridership and cost recovery costs down, is we'll have some sort of a blended thing. Another example is we should, in fairness, right the wrong of the half cent and get back the $100 million that has been used, that it's the capital expansion fund that has been used to cover operating expenses in the county's transportation fund. And by the way, the CITT, the Citizens Transportation Trust Fund, has already voted to restore that funding. So now it's just a matter of doing it. And that's $100 million that could be bonded out at somewhere between $1.25 billion and $1.5 billion, which is about 40% of the money that is needed to do these 6 lines. These 6 lines are cost out on the capital side at about $4 billion.
So would this cost Miami-Dade County taxpayers any additional funding right now? You're talking about using existing funding for these projects.
That's right.
And the private sector.
Right. What I'm talking about is using existing funding. What I'm talking about is using creative funding. And my father, who has proposed, who's also on
Xavier Suarez, who's a Miami-Dade County Commissioner.
Suarez. He's on the Miami-Dade County MPO as well, has had some good and interesting financing ideas, like getting a portion of MDX's gross revenues and dedicating that to mass transit, getting a higher recovery rate for our license plate fees that go up to Tallahassee. I recently spoke with Billy Corbin, who's a dear friend and film filmmaker, who was saying we should be tapping into TDT and CDT funds, which I completely agree with. CDT is Convention Development Tax and Tourist Development Tax. If we have tourists that are coming here, that are enjoying our city and are taxing our infrastructure, we should be able to use some of the funds that are generated through their expenditures to deal with our transportation infrastructure. So those are just sort of easy ways that we can tap into some already existing funding sources.
Commissioner, this all sounds great. We have about a minute left.
Sure.
And we'll have to come back and tackle later on, once this is accomplished, how we get people to ride the trains and get out of their cars. But when might we expect to see some action on this?
I think we could, if we went the private sector route, we could see some action as quickly as in the next 12 months. But that all depends on, getting consensus from a lot of people. If we go the federal funding route, you're talking about a very, very long process. You have to do, environmental studies. You have to do design and engineering studies. So the federal government will give you money, grant money, which by the way is our taxpayer money that we're paying, our income taxes. But it's a very long and arduous process that could take many years. So.
Right. So I'm sorry, but there's been a lot of studies done on this already, right? It's not a new plan. Commissioner Bovo had a stack of studies that he could point you to. Yeah, look, the transit has been studied ad nauseum in our community for sure. Some of these plans or some of these lines are new and have not gone into what they call PD&E, which we're going to do hopefully at the end of this process, because there's 3 of the 6 that have not been studied through PD&E. But the other ones are either in PD&E or have completed PD&E and need just an update. But the point is that these processes through the federal government take forever. And so what we need to do, one of the things I'm working with Congressman Carlos Corbello on, is seeing if we can have a reimbursement, if we can work on a reimbursement basis. In other words, if we front the money, or if the private sector fronts the money, just like a loan from a bank when you're buying a home, if your auntie leaves you something in her will, you can get that money and you can repay your loan. In other words, we want to be able to use the federal funds to be able to repay private funding so we can get these projects done and started right away. Okay. Well, we're going to have you come back to issues and see how the progress is going.
Sure.
All right, Commissioner Suarez, thank you for joining me today. Tackling Miami-Dade's transportation woes. The Metropolitan Planning Organization is going back in time, dusting off a 2002 plan in hopes of fixing our current traffic nightmare. Back then, lawmakers wanted a half-penny sales tax to fund construction of 6 new light rail lines. They got that sales tax, but to this day, little track has been.
But it really started with the recognition, first and foremost, as you stated at the beginning of the program, that the half cent hasn't delivered. But that realization, alone doesn't get you anywhere. It's just simply a criticism of what hasn't happened. Also, there was a lot of, and there's been a lot of fighting over what line is going to go first, and a lot of parochialism and
This initiative. Commissioner Suarez, thanks for being here today.
Sean, it's a pleasure to be with you.
So first of all, can you explain to us what is this SMART plan?
Well, the SMART plan stands for the Strategic Miami Area Rapid Transit Plan, and we developed that name in conjunction with the Transit Solutions Committee Chairman, Chairman Moss, and our Executive Director, Eileen Bouclé, and Chairman of the County Commission, Jean Monestin. When we returned from San Francisco, visiting the San Francisco transit system, which was the BART, the Bay Area Rapid Transit System. So we felt that it would be a smart thing to brand our transit system, the SMART plan, in the hopes of reigniting interest in the plan and obviously in the execution of the plan, which is the most important part.
Joining us to explain why he thinks reviving that 15-year-old plan is a smart idea for Miami-Dade Transit, we welcome City of Miami Commissioner Francis Suarez, representing District 4. Commissioner Suarez is also the Vice Chair of the Miami-Dade Metropolitan Planning Organization's Transit Solutions Committee and spearheaded